Welcome to CM 481 Construction Operations, Module number 4. Today what we're going to talk about is communication on the job site. Communication is one of those things that will either make the job site go really well or really badly. It'll make the job be successful or not successful. Communication is such a huge part of construction. Because construction is a relationship-based business, you have to be able to communicate. And I think in this day and age, we're getting shortchanged when it comes to communication. Because there is so much communication that doesn't happen that used to happen. Now, I'm not blaming anything, but we do have a tendency to text people instead of give them a call on the phone. And I'm sure you can relate to that. Like, I really don't want to talk to that person, so I'm just going to text them. Text will be easier. And sometimes a text is the best way to communicate. But we haven't learned communication skills throughout our childhood the way that we used to. And it's so important for construction and so important for job site management in general, that I want to take this week, this module, and I want to make sure that you guys have a good basis in communication, in knowing what you need in order to communicate really well on a job site, and really well with subcontractors, and really well with owners. Because we have to communicate with so many different types of people all day, every day, maybe at the exact same time. You might be sitting in a room with a subcontractor foreman who maybe didn't graduate high school but knows so much about their trade and knows how to do it in and out and is extremely intelligent. And then in that same room, you might have a owner who's worth $1 billion and thinks they run the world. And you have to figure out how to get everybody to come together. This is the job of a superintendent. This is going to be your job. Maybe as a project manager, maybe as a superintendent, but this is something we do in construction. So it's important that we spend some time on communication. And there are a lot of reasons communication fails.
Here's what's going to happen. I am going to have to fix you, manage you on a more personal scale, a more micro form of management. Jim, what is that called?
Microagement?
Boom. Yes. Now, Jim is going to be the client. Dwight, you're going to have to sell to him without being aggressive, hostile, or difficult. Let's go.
All right, fine. Ring, ring. Hello?
Hello, this is Dwight Schrute from the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company.
Wow, that's great, because I need paper.
Excellent, then you are in luck, because we are having a limited time offer only on everything.
Wow, this is my lucky day.
Ask him his name.
What is your name, sir?
I am Bill Buttlicker.
Really, that's your real name?
How dare you? My family built this country, by the way.
Be respectful, Dwight, please.
Yes, Michael.
Could you hold on 1 second? That's my other line.
What? No, but I...
Hello? Yeah. No, I'm just on the phone with this stupid salesman. He's so dumb. Probably just gonna keep him on the line forever and not buy anything. Okay.
It's up to you to change his mind.
Sorry, that was a family emergency.
Oh, no, what's wrong?
You know what? That's private.
Boundaries, Dwight, come on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Buttlicker. As I was saying,
Son,
we're
you
having
just
a
have to
limited...
Speak up a little bit louder. I'm hard of hearing.
He's hard if he's an old man.
Okay, as I was saying, right now we are having...
Talk louder.
Okay, our prices have never been lower.
Son, you have to talk louder.
Never been lower.
Louder, son!
Buttlicker! Our prices have never been lower!
Okay, stop it. That is totally inappropriate. You never yell at the client.
Now,
Never
you listen to
yell at the
me,
client.
sir.
Here we go.
The 3 words I would describe you as is aggressive,
Yes.
hostile, and definitely difficult.
Give me the phone.
I'm
Give me the
irate
phone.
right
Give
now.
me the phone.
Please give me
He's
another
irate.
chance.
Give me the phone.
Mr. Buttlicker.
Give me the phone.
I have to put you on with my boss.
Well, I should hope so. Who is this?
Hello, this is Michael Scott, regional manager.
Well, this is William M. Buttlicker.
Hello, Mr. Buttlicker. How may we help you?
Michael, I like the sound of your voice. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna buy $1 million worth of paper products today.
See how it's done? Thank you very much, sir. I don't think you'll regret it. See what I did?
You're the master.
There is one condition, Michael.
Yes.
You have to fire the salesman that treated me so terribly.
Don't do it, Michael.
It's $1 million sale.
There's so many things we can control about communication. And there are things like time, when we communicate, the place we communicate, the subject we communicate, the words we use to communicate. We can always exercise controls over those things. But there's a lot of things that sometimes we can't control. And we really want to look at both of those sides. But some of the reasons that communication breaks down, some of the reasons that communication fails in construction are, first of all, lack of preparation and planning. Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you went into a meeting and because of lack of preparation on the part of whoever was running that meeting, the meeting failed because they really didn't know what they were talking about and they really hadn't planned on what they were going to talk about in that meeting. So the meeting went a direction that they didn't want it to go. They had no control over it because of lack of prep and planning. Another reason that communication breaks down and fails is failure to exercise controls that are available. Now those were the controls that I just mentioned. Things like the time that the meeting happens, the words that you use, the subjects that you go over, the place where you talk about these things. Those are controls. And so failure to exercise those controls that are available to you can make communication break down. Another thing that can make communication break down is making the wrong assumptions about your audience. So when you start to assume things about your audience, you're basically saying, well, I know what you think. I know how you feel. But you don't. Okay, let me be the person that breaks that to you. You don't always know what a person thinks about something. You don't always know what a person feels about something. And so don't go into any conversation assuming anything. So many times people offend others because they went in there assuming, well, this person is that type of person, so I can talk this way around them. Or politics, right? We assume that somebody is on this side of the fence, so we go in and we talk to them as if they were on that side of the fence, and maybe they're not. We made a wrong assumption, and now they're offended by what we said to them because we made a wrong assumption. So never make an assumption, no matter how strongly you feel that you know that that assumption is right. Don't make an assumption about your audience. Another thing that can make communication break down is unexpected events that block communication. Okay, a lot of times those are things that maybe you don't have control over. Things that might happen that could block the communication. And so these are things that we're going to talk about in more detail. Another reason that communication breaks down, I've given you four, this is the fifth, is failure to recognize barriers to understanding. So there's a lot of different types of barriers to understanding that we don't always understand. We don't understand what that barrier is to understanding, but we need to be sensitive that there are barriers to people understanding what we say. There's different types of barriers. We're going to go through what those types are, because hopefully we can figure out ways to communicate better by looking at how poor communication happens. And then I'm going to give you some realistic, on-the-job tools that you can use to communicate better as a construction job site manager, construction project manager, or just in your daily lives. If you think this is just for construction, it's not. I'm applying it to construction, but these are communication tools that you can use every day. So let's talk about what communication is. What is communication? What's the definition of communication? I mean, you probably have an understanding in your head, but let's talk about a definition. Communication is the process of sending thoughts, instructions, or messages from one person or group to another. Communication is the process of sending thoughts, instructions, or messages from one person or group to another. And so, why does that break down? That seems easy. Like, okay, I've got a thought. I'm going to take that thought and I'm going to send it to this person. Sounds pretty simple, right? It's not always that simple. There are so many things that get in the way of that process. And when we look at the basics of just a message, we start to begin to understand why communication is so complicated. There are 6 basic pieces to a message, okay? Elements of a message. Who are we talking to? What are we trying to say? Where is it? When is it? Why is it? And how is it? That's 6 different things that we need to communicate for every single message. Now, when you did your daily reports, you had all of this stuff you had to put in there, and hopefully when you communicated in that daily report, you had all of this. Who, what, where, when, why, how. I would venture to say that most of you in your daily reports had 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. Many of you probably skipped over why. Why? Why did you skip over why? Why is why important? Why should we care about why? Why should anybody care why? Okay, well, let me talk to you about this in terms of construction. You go and you tell somebody, you're a superintendent on a job, and you say, let's build this wall, okay? So you are going to build this wall right here, right now, and you're going to build it using those tools and that material. Which one did I miss? I missed the why. I told them exactly what they needed to do, where they needed to do it, when they needed to do it, and how they were going to do it. But I didn't tell them why they were going to do it. Is that important? I mean, really, as leaders, we should just tell people things and they should do it, right? Is it really important that we tell them why? Why do I got to waste my time telling you why? Well, it is important. Because you want people to be more autonomous in their work, to make decisions that affect them. And so what you can tell them is, yeah, all that stuff. But why do we need to put that wall there? Well, because first, if we got to do that one first, because if we don't do that one, then we can't build on these. So we can't start over here because we need that one first, and then we'll move around the room and build the others, because that one has to tie into something specific. If you tell people that, along with all the other stuff, then they can understand why they're doing it. And they can be more motivated to actually do the work. And so with all types of communication, all types, but specifically in verbal communication, a lot of times we leave out one or more pieces of these information. We assume that people know the why. We assume that people know the who. We assume that people know the where. We assume that people know how to do it. We assume. But you know what assumptions are? And you know what assumptions do? Assuming makes an ass out of you and me. Okay? We should never assume. We always want to give all of the information, the full picture. So, what I want you to remember here is don't assume that somebody knows these things. Just go ahead and give them all 6. If they know something already, they're going to say, okay, I already know that. That's fine. And they won't commit it to memory because they already know it. But you don't know what they know and what they don't know all the time. So make sure you're giving them all of that information. Let's break down the communication process into its really simple, basic pieces. We have 3. We have the sender, we have the message, and we have the receiver. We have the sender, the receiver, and the message that goes in between those two. Okay? So that's really simple. Let's talk about each of these. The sender. The sender will put information into words. Okay? We've got this information. The sender puts it into words and expects the words to carry the bulk of the information over to the receiver. Right? So those words have power. Now, whether that's spoken word or written word. The nice thing about spoken word is that there's other things that go along with the spoken word, like facial expressions, hand movements, inflection in my voice, eye contact, all of these non-verbal language things that go along with verbal words. That's good. When they're written down, we need to make sure they're even more clear, because you know how it goes. Sometimes those emails get taken the wrong way. People imply their own inflection into your words that maybe you didn't imply. This happens all the time, especially with my wife. She's like, "Why were you yelling at me?" I'll send her a text message. "Why were you yelling?" "I'm not yelling. Did I yell? No. That's not what I meant at all. No, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. I just meant, like, how was your day?" Not, "How was your day?" Inflection means a lot. So when you're writing the words, make sure it's super clear. When you're using spoken words, the words you choose are very, very valuable and important. The words used must have common meaning. Okay? If the person you're talking to doesn't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, then they don't have common meaning. And so a lot of times that's like jargon or like regional things that we call stuff. But in construction, we've got all these things we say. Did you write that RFI? Well, that RFI said this. What's an RFI? If you're not talking to somebody who's in construction, they don't know what an RFI is. So you have to make sure that that jargon is understood by the person that you're talking to. How you express things, that's always important. To make sure that you're expressing things the way that that person understands. Do not make assumptions, here we go again, about what that other person's knowledge of those words are. Don't make an assumption, because you don't always know. The biggest problem with students who go out into the industry right now is they want everybody to think that they know everything already. Well, I went to school for construction management for 4 years. I should know everything that they're talking about. But you don't, and you won't. And so you need to ask questions. And so a lot of times you'll be on the other end of this. Somebody will be talking to you about something, and they'll use some jargon that you don't understand, and you say, sure, because you want them, and you're like, oh, I'll go Google it later, right? But you want them to think that you know everything. So if you're the communicator and you're using words, make sure that those words are words that the person understands. Don't just assume, because you know what assume does now. Don't just assume that they do. The other thing, I really want you to pay attention to this. So put down your phone and listen to me for just this section. Just this second, right now, okay? You hear me? You looking in my eyes? Before you talk to somebody, you need to capture their attention. See what I just did there? I captured your attention before I said it, because now you have listened to that. I know you've listened to that because I captured your attention before I went forward. It's a thing that speakers do all the time. They say, if you listen to one thing in my message, I want you to listen to this one thing. And all of a sudden everybody's paying attention. Like, well, I can listen to one thing. I mean, maybe not 10, but I can listen to one thing, right? So you capture their attention so that they can understand the words that you're saying. The next piece of this after the sender is the message. We have the sender, receiver, and the message in between. So let's think about the basic elements of a message. Now, when there's a message, you're trying to get something across. But what's the purpose of that message? Are you trying to get information to somebody? Are you trying to get them to do something? What response are you expecting from them? Do you expect them to take a specific action at a certain time? What is the purpose of your message? Think about the purpose when you're giving a message. My purpose is to get across to you how to communicate better. I've thought about and planned how I'm going to do that and how this message is going to come across to you. And hopefully I do a decent job. I'm not promising, but I'm trying, okay? But what's the purpose of your message? If there is something very simple that you want somebody to do, keep the message simple. Okay, so this is where you need to kiss a lot of things, all right? Just kiss, 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 kiss. Keep it simple, stupid, all right? This is the KISS principle. Keep your message simple if you have a simple thing that needs to happen. Don't bog it down with a lot of words. Don't bog it down with a lot of explanation. Keep it simple. You still need to answer those 6 things and make sure that it contains those 6 things, but keep it simple. Make sure it's directly to the point. Don't water it down with all these other little things. Direct and to the point. Now, if it's not simple and there's a lot that goes along with it, then it's going to be a detailed message, and it's going to be a detailed maybe conversation. And there's a lot that goes along with that, like facial expressions, hand gestures, tone of your voice, inflections. If I go like this, I'm angry, right? But if I lower my voice, then you know I'm maybe more serious about this. Maybe because my eyebrows go down a little bit, I'm really serious about this. I really am. That communicates something. So if it's a long message, there might be a lot of nonverbal communication that happens. And so we need to pay attention to that. And sometimes with as much of that as goes into it, there can be a lot of misunderstandings. And so we may want to consider writing it down. If there's a lot of steps to your purpose, like you want them to do a lot of things, you just may want to put that in writing. We need to consider that as another option. We got to figure out what our purpose is so that we can figure out whether we need to kiss it or email it. Right? Okay, remember that. You got some message? Are you going to kiss it or are you going to email it? Now let's talk about the receiver. So sender, message, receiver. The receiver is usually pretty inactive. Like somebody walks up to me, I'm the receiver, and I go like this. You see that? Pretty inactive, right? The receiver is usually pretty inactive. So there's two things. If you're talking to somebody, then you're talking to a receiver, or you might be the receiver. So let's look at both of those. If you're talking to somebody, let's say you want to do a pick with the crane tomorrow, and you go up to the operator and you say, "Hey Tony, do you remember that pick we're supposed to do tomorrow?" You have prepared the receiver for what they're about to hear. Now they're ready to receive it. Tony is ready to receive information about that pick. Maybe what time it's at, how we're doing it, what it is, why we're doing it, why we're putting. Remember, all 6 of them. Okay, but the receiver, you want to prepare them as best you can. Now, when you are the receiver, it's a little bit different. When you are the receiver, you need to make sure that all 6 of those questions are answered. The who, what, when, where, why, how. Okay? So make sure that you're asking questions. A good receiver is going to ask questions about the message. The message is coming their direction, and maybe it has all the information in it, maybe it doesn't. Ask questions to either clarify the information or maybe get more information to understand the message. All right? So we've got sender, we've got the message, and we've got the receiver of the message. Next, let's take a look at the 3 key communication activities: speaking, listening, and feedback. Speaking, listening, and feedback. We're breaking all this down into some real simple stuff, aren't we? So, speaking. Now, let's talk about the best way to speak to somebody if you want them to understand you. There's a thing called the preacher's concept, what it means is that there was this really great preacher in town, and his congregation always knew exactly what he was saying, and they said he was one of the best communicators ever. When asked why, they said, "I don't know, he just is." So they went to the preacher and they said, "Why does everybody consider you such a great communicator?" And he said, "I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing I do. I always stick to these 3 principles. I tell them what I'm going to tell them, I tell them, and then I tell them what I told them. I tell them what I'm going to tell them, I tell them, and then I tell them what I told them." All right? And sometimes, he said, well, if it's really complicated, I'll even do that for one chunk of what I'm telling them. So I may tell them at the beginning of the sermon, "This is what I'm telling you," and then I tell them. And then I tell them what I told them. And then for this one section, I might say, "Here's what I'm about to tell you." He tells them, and then he tells them what he told them. Just in that one section. And so he always went through that. So everybody always came away with something because they heard it first, they were ready to receive it, they received it, and then they were reminded of what they received. This is a great principle for you as an individual trying to get a message across. Speaking. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them. And then tell them what you told them. Okay? Now the second piece of this is the listening. You need to be a great listener. That is your biggest job when you get out into construction, is to be a great listener. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of people confuse listening with hearing. They are 2 totally separate things. A lot of times when I'm talking to my wife, I'm hearing her, but I'm not listening to her. And then when it comes later, like, "I told you that." And I was like, I probably heard you, but I didn't listen to you, okay? And now I'm in trouble, right? So we need to become better listeners, not better hearers. Many times what we're doing when we're supposedly listening to somebody is we're just hearing them. And while we're hearing them, we're thinking about what we're going to say. We're all guilty of this. All of us. Everybody who's under the sound of my voice right now is guilty of this. We're formulating our response before they ever finish. And it's pretty short-sighted of us to think that we know what they mean before they're ever done. I mean, we might, but we might not. And a lot of times we don't. So we need to make sure we're understanding what they say. And a lot of times that's with questions, which goes into the next piece, which is feedback. But we need to be asking questions so that we truly understand. That's listening. That's active listening. You can't truly respond to somebody about something until you actually understand exactly what they're trying to communicate with you. That's true listening. Don't confuse listening with hearing. Now, feedback. Feedback is what happens after listening. So you've listened really well. Now, feedback is to increase understanding of what was said. So it could be in the form of a question. Feedback could be asking the person a question about what they said so that you truly understand it. Feedback must be used whenever there is a chance that misunderstanding could have happened. And you know those 6 basic principles, the who, what, where, when, why, how. If there's any question about any of those, feedback helps to clarify those things. If there was any information that was missing or assumed, maybe we shouldn't assume that. Maybe feedback is going to answer that question for us. And so there's some basic ways that we can obtain feedback. We can ask if we're the message giver, okay? If we are the sender of the message, we can ask the receiver his or her understanding of the message. So have them repeat it back to us. And then watch what they say. Do they have questions about how they receive it? Or, do they have a questioning look on their face? Like, I think you said to do this. Well, maybe it wasn't as clear as you thought it was when you said it, when you gave that message. Ask questions about your message and listen carefully to what the receiver says. Did the receiver actually hear what you had to say? You can look at their facial expressions. Like I said, just this. That may not be an understanding look. I see this in students' eyes all the time, like, what did you say? I don't know what he just said. You know what he just said? And they look at each other like, do you know what he just said? No, you don't? I don't know either. If I'm watching that, I can say, my message didn't get across. Now I need to say it again and make it clearer. Okay, so watch the way that your receivers look. And then talk about the feedback. Talk about it together. Like, well, you thought I said this, but what I was really trying to communicate is this. And so sharing back and forth the clarifications in feedback. Okay? So make sure people truly understand your message. And it's smart to never assume, okay? Never assume. Always make sure we are speaking, listening, and that our feedback is good. Okay? In the beginning, I talked to you about barriers to people's understanding of what you were saying, the message coming across. And we've talked about how to communicate, the basics of a message, but let's talk about some of those barriers. Because if we can understand the barriers, we can overcome the barriers, we can become better communicators. And so sometimes it might be that you're just disorganized in your thoughts. You didn't prep and plan like you should, and your stuff's coming across disorganized, and it's not good. Or maybe sometimes people just aren't paying attention. I like to believe that when you guys don't get my message, it's because you're not paying attention. But at the same time, it might be because I have not done a good job in prepping and planning and organizing my thoughts. And then there's other barriers that we need to think about. And I need to think about this. As a professional communicator, that's what I am. I'm a professional communicator that's trying to get a message across to you so you learn something. You need to be a professional listener and be asking questions and giving feedback. Okay? But we can break down these barriers into 5 basic pieces: message barriers, environmental barriers, emotional barriers, receiver barriers, and sender barriers. So let me break each one of those down a little bit more for you. The message barriers. So sometimes, we've kind of discussed this, is that words mean different things to different people. Sometimes the words that are coming out of our mouth mean something else to somebody else. And so we think we're giving a message, but we're actually talking about something else. You know, this happens in foreign languages all the time. We think we're talking about potatoes, and they think we're talking about like something derogatory. I don't know. It's just one of those things. There are barriers that have to do with words. Some other message barriers, sometimes the real message is difficult to sort out. It contains like too many words, too many issues, and sometimes that is a barrier. Too much stuff, okay? Sometimes our purpose, remember we talked about our purpose? Maybe we have multiple purposes, and so they can't sort out this purpose from this purpose. It kind of seems like this purpose, right? And so we make that a barrier to understanding. Sometimes expressions and words are inconsistent. So how we express something, the words we use, sometimes that's inconsistent across the board. And so we need to pay attention to our words. Our words are important. We need to make sure people are understanding those words. We need to make sure there's not a language barrier. We need to make sure that our words are consistent. Okay, so these are message barriers that we may need to overcome. Environmental barriers. So environmental barriers are like we go to give a message to somebody. We're the sender, they're the receiver, we're giving them a message, and we do it in the middle of a job site where you can hardly hear anything. So maybe the location is too noisy, and so words get lost. That's a barrier. Noise can be distracting. Weather can be distracting. I've plenty of times been outside and we've been, freezing our butts off. And all I want to do and all I can think about is going inside. And so that's a barrier to my understanding because all I'm thinking about is going inside, not what their message actually is. Sometimes a lack of privacy. So sometimes people are not willing to ask the questions because of a lack of privacy. So the feedback and the understanding of the message is not good because we have no privacy, and so sometimes we need to think about our message and whether it requires privacy. Okay? And sometimes they will just wall off your message because it's a conversation that should have happened in private, and maybe you weren't having that conversation in private. And sometimes it can be in a dangerous area or in a dangerous business. Safety is important. If we're having a long conversation in an area that's dangerous, maybe we're a little bit distracted and not actually understanding and not giving feedback like we should and not listening like we should. And so there's a barrier to understanding. These are all environmental barriers. We need to think about the environment in which we give our message to make sure that none of these barriers are in place. And then we have emotional barriers. You can imagine what this could be. The receiver of the message might feel stress due to maybe being criticized. So that is going to be an emotional barrier to them understanding what you're saying. If they're being criticized about something, you're going to need to pay attention to whether they're going to feel that and how you overcome it. The receiver or the sender, there may be fear. One of them or both of them might be afraid of each other for whatever reason. Maybe one has power over the other's job, and so there's fear there of losing their job, losing their position. That is going to be an emotional barrier to understanding the conversation. If I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my job, because if I don't know this, then when the person tells me it, I'm going to say yes, yep, okay, even if I don't understand it. Because there's a fear there that if I ask a question, then I might get fired. Okay, that's an emotional barrier to a conversation and to a message. There might be anger. So if there's a couple people that are angry, there's not going to be understanding in that conversation. And we live or we work in a stressful environment. And so there is going to be anger that happens. I mean, I've been on job sites where it went to blows between subcontractors because there was too many people working in one area. Seriously, guys, this is just work. This isn't life. Why are we taking it that seriously? Come on now. But it gets to that point because it's a stressful industry. Another thing is harsh language. Be careful about the language you use around people. Now, you might think, well, everybody in the construction industry uses cuss words or drops the F-bomb. But that may not be the case. There are certain people, when they hear those words, it creates an emotion within them and they shut down. You know, if somebody drops an F-bomb, it's like, whoa. And I understand we're in an industry that maybe a lot of people cuss. But you have to be careful when you know your audience, when you know the receiver and you're the sender, make sure that you're not using language that is preventing your message from getting across to them. So if there's, anger in a situation and there's F-bombs and there's all these barriers to your message getting across, how many people have ever been in an argument and you don't remember anything about that argument other than that you were in an argument and you're pissed? Well, that's because there was a lot of barriers there. There was anger, there was probably words, there was fear, and fear of being criticized. All of those things could have been present in that argument. And so, yeah, there was nothing getting across from here to here. Now I'm just giving relationship advice. But we're in a relationship-based business, so we need to understand when those barriers are in place. And then we have our receiver and sender barriers. These are kind of intertwined. We've got a receiver on one side and a sender on the other. So what could those two people do wrong in either receiving or sending? Some of the receiver barriers that we have, we've already kind of talked about. The receiver may not understand the message and doesn't ask questions about it. They're afraid to appear dumb or inexperienced, and they don't want to ask questions. So they may appear to agree, but they're uncertain about what you're telling them. But there's other things, like they may be preoccupied, like they're working on something, they're building something, and you're talking in their ear, and they're preoccupied, and they say, oh, yeah, sure. Yep, I got that. Nope, yep, definitely. And they actually don't receive the message. Another barrier could be that they get offended. As soon as somebody gets offended, usually their wall goes up and they're not receiving anymore. And so you need to make sure that you're not giving them a message that's contrary to their beliefs or values, unless that's the whole purpose of the message. Sometimes the receiver jumps to conclusions. So, that whole active listening thing. So they're halfway through what they're saying, and the receiver jumps to conclusions about what they're saying, and then they start thinking about what they're going to reply to it, even though they really don't understand what they were actually going to say. And sometimes the receiver hears or sees what they want to hear or see. Oh man, this happens so much right now in our day and age. People hear and see what they want to hear and see. There might be this whole message and they pull out this part, and this part. I like those. That's what I wanted to see. That's what I see. Or, if it's the opposite side of what they think, then they're like, pull out this part and this part and this part. And they're like, oh man, I can't believe they said those things. It's awful. But really, you need to have the whole context to hear or see what that person is actually saying. Receiver. We've got way too many receiver problems in our, not just in our industry, but in our lives right now. I know you understand how this is. No matter where you stand on issues, there's definitely receiver issues. No matter what news channel you watch, they receive things and they report things. They're message senders, okay? So they're really bad receivers and they're really bad senders of the message. So I don't know why we watch the news in the first place. I actually don't. So let's talk about sender barriers. Let's move away from this. Sender barriers are when the sender has a problem with how they're sending the message. So they may not be sending the message in a clear way. They may not be expressing it in a clear way. The other thing a sender might not have is they may not be aware of the response that they're going for. So they didn't have a purpose for their message, so that they don't know what the response they want. And so the sender is not going to be able to tell from feedback if the receiver actually received anything, because they don't know what they're looking for. The other thing that senders can do, make the wrong assumption, again, about what the receiver understands, or just about the receiver in general, or what the receiver thinks, or the predispositions of the receiver. So the sender has like bad assumptions. Don't assume anything about your receiver. The other thing a sender can do is use unfamiliar words. Remember when we talked about RFIs and these things that maybe not everybody understands. So make sure that you're using familiar words to your receiver. You could fail to reduce the environmental factors and emotional barriers. So the environmental barriers and the emotional barriers we just talked about, the sender needs to be conscious of those things and remove those barriers. So that could be a sender barrier failure. Or the sender doesn't check for understanding from the receiver and receive commitment from the receiver for doing the stuff, doing the work. Okay, so now we know what the barriers are. The message, environmental, emotional, receiver, sender. We know what those barriers are. So how can we neutralize those barriers? So some of the environmental barriers, by picking a receptive time, a receptive place, and a receptive delivery area for your message, we can prevent some of those environmental barriers. So pay attention to where you're giving the message. Okay? Pay attention to that. We have a big job site with a lot of noise. Be careful that you're not giving the message in a bad place environmentally. Avoid receiver barriers by getting the receiver's attention. Hey, I really want to talk to you about this. Hey, can we talk about that pick tomorrow that we're going to do? I really want to talk to you about this. This is a very important pick that we're going to do on the job site. So get the receiver's attention, and then be careful, once again, not to challenge their values and their beliefs. Usually, we're not in a situation on a job site where we're in a position to challenge one's beliefs or values. So make sure you're not doing that. And then avoid emotional barriers by being calm. So when you talk to somebody, talk to them in a calm and patient way, with questions, and maybe there's instructing, but maybe it goes along with questions for them, and you're calm and you're patient. Make sure you're doing this on a job. It'll make you a great manager. It'll make you a great leader. It'll make you a great superintendent. Have patience. Be calm. Don't let stress overcome you, so that you can avoid those emotional barriers like anger and fighting and stress. And then avoid some of those message barriers by using familiar words. But don't use the unfamiliar words. And don't assume that your audience always knows or understands what your words mean. And then limit the number of messages that you're giving them. So if you have multiple purposes, you either need to maybe put that in an email or keep it simple, right? So either KISS or email. Make sure that if you have a complicated message, that maybe you're doing it in a different way. But keep it simple so that the main point, the main purpose of your message gets across to your audience. So no matter what situation you're in, no matter whether you're trying to communicate with subcontractors, communicate with an owner, communicate in front of a huge audience, or with one person on a job site next to a job box, always stick to these things. Plan your presentation. Plan what your purpose is. Choose the time and the place that can avoid some of those barriers. Follow the keep it simple, stupid, and make sure you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And then get feedback from them. Obtain input from them. Ask them questions about what you told them. Ensure understanding by obtaining that feedback. And then, if their understanding is incorrect, try again. Use some different words. Maybe your words were not understood. Don't just say the same thing over and over again and expect different results. We know what that's called. Give examples. Demonstrate it if necessary. Get involved and demonstrate what you are trying to communicate to them. And once again, be patient. Be understanding. And finally, gain commitment from them. Don't just leave assuming that what you're going to or what you want to happen is going to happen. Gain commitment from that person. Either it might be commitment in the opposite direction, like there's no way in heck I'm going to do that, but at least know where they stand. Are they going to do it? Are they not going to do it? Gain some commitment from them. Otherwise, you don't know if your purpose got across. You don't know if your message got across. Okay? So, very simply, plan your presentation. Choose your time and place. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Okay? Obtain input from them. Ensure understanding from them. Get feedback from them. If they don't understand, try again with different words. Give examples. Demonstrate if necessary. Okay? Get involved and actually show them. But be patient and understanding and get commitment from them. all of these communication philosophies, all of these communication tools are very, very valuable in the construction world for job site management, for really any communication that you're going to do in your life. So I really hope that you take these things forward with you and that you use them, that you've taken notes, that you understand what I've said. And if you don't, maybe you'll give me some feedback and say, well, what about this? What about this? And I'll clarify for you. That's good communication. That's good listening. All right. Talk to you later.